Greetings and welcome to the first ever Clinical Research Nurse Day. Welcome to the virtual event here, Clinical Research Nurses, the Heartbeat of Healthcare Progress. We are celebrating the first Clinical Research Nurse Day today, and we've invited you to join us in a discussion on the crucial role that nurses play in the advancement of healthcare. My name is David Kissinger, and I am the Chief Vision Officer of Nurse Now Staffing. It is a great pleasure to be welcoming you today. On July 12, 1974, the National Research Act was signed into law. This created the basic principles of research and conduct and ways to ensure these principles were followed. Since then, clinical research nurses have played a central role in research and delivering ethical care. We are gathering today to recognize and celebrate the role of these nurses and create the first Clinical Research Nurse Day. Thank you for joining us here on July 12th for a virtual panel discussion on the role of clinical research nurses, the progress towards and continuing need for healthcare equity in the field, and the future of clinical research nursing. I am very excited as we begin our dive into the clinical research ecosystem through the lenses of those who are at the heart of it. Today, we're going to learn about the current state of clinical research trials and how the industry is becoming a cornerstone to advancements in tech and healthcare equity. We're also going to be hearing directly from nurses in the field and learn about the benefits and what it takes to pursue and develop a career in the clinical research industry. Finally, we're looking forward to meeting experts in nursing education who will discuss new clinical research curriculum and available programs and evolving trends in nurse education. It is my pleasure to welcome you and our speakers and participants to this inaugural event today. I'd like to begin by introducing two of our initial presenters in our first presentation. Clinical Trials Today, the role of clinical research nurses, advancement in healthcare equity and technology. Clinical research is an industry that was drastically impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. In this introductory section, we'll discuss the current state of clinical research trials and how they contribute to advancements in technology and healthcare equity. A few housekeeping items. We do ask that if you have any questions for the presenters, please put those in the chat, and we will be reviewing those and then bringing those forward as we're able to the presenters of the individual sections. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome two industry leaders in this area. First, I'm very pleased to introduce Ms. Nikki Norris. Nikki, throughout her career, has worked in healthcare and health services and clinical research. She spent 3 decades growing, leading, and transforming companies with a focus on driving exceptional results and building dynamic cultures. She has expertise in turnaround management, strategic planning, finance, budgeting, planning, financial analysis, marketing, change management, new product development, process reengineering, negotiation strategy, team building, and leadership development. She has extensive governance experience. She's led the board of Clinical Resource Network, the holding company of Symphony Clinical Research, through the 3 owners during her tenure. For 7 years, she led as an EVP and a CEO of the College of American Pathologists, as a member of the Board of Governors with primary responsibilities for governance activities as well as full P&L responsibility. In addition, Nikki has served on the board and executive committee of the Chicago chapter of Healthcare Business Women's Association and the Board of Diversity Alliance for Science. Nikki perfected her governance knowledge and skills with 2 governance courses at Northwest University and Kellogg School of Management. Most recently, Nikki was the CEO of Symphony Clinical Research an innovative clinical research company. Symphony takes clinical research studies to visits to patients in their homes in 57 countries. By making study participation convenient, patient enrollment, engagement, and retention are increased. Symphony is the pioneer and innovator in the virtual decentralized trials area. Having led the company for 11 years as CEO, the revenue grew at 20% CAGR to 20 million, while EBITDA increased from a loss of 20K per month to a gain of more than 20K per month. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Ms. Nikki Norris to our panel today.
Thank you, David.
I'm also pleased to welcome our next panelist, Elizabeth Ness. Elizabeth earned her BSN from Boston College and her MS in nursing education from the University of Maryland School of Nursing. Her current position is the Director of Office of Education and Compliance at the Center of Cancer Research, part of the intramural research program at the National Cancer Institute in Bethesda, Maryland. Her primary responsibilities include coordinating, developing, and evaluating both educational and quality management activities for the CRC. Prior to working for the NCI, Ms. Ness worked for 6 years as a phase 1 research nurse at Lombardia Cancer Institute in Washington, D.C., and for 3 years with a research consulting firm in Bethesda, Maryland, where she worked on clinical trials for the NCI's cancer therapy and evaluation program. Welcome, Ms. Elizabeth Ness.
Thank you for having me, David.
So we're here today, and the chat is open, so we're open to being able to receive questions from the chat. But I'd like to kick us off here with some initial thoughts as we talk about the clinical research. It's an industry that's been dramatically affected by COVID. I think it brought so much to bear in a time when research, really needed to be at the forefront. So what is the current state of clinical research trials today? And we'll start off, Nikki, with you, and then we'll roll to Liz.
Okay, thank you, David, and congratulations to all you clinical research nurses out there in the audience. I think it's important to understand that much clinical research is done to bring a new drug to market. And to get a new drug to market today, it costs $1 to $2 billion and 8 to 10 years. And the big issues are getting people to enroll in your trial and getting people to stay in your trial. On average, clinical research trials today have a 25% dropout rate, which is incredibly expensive, both in time and money, because you have to then re-recruit, find someone new to replace a particular subject, run them through all the testing and the anything they've done up until that point. Compliance continues to be a big issue, and getting a test population that is similar to the population that will be using the drug eventually is really difficult. Many new drugs, Liz, I just heard your presentation. Many new drugs and clinical research trials are paid for by the government, by NIH, by NCI, but they're also paid for by the big pharma companies. And I think it's interesting to note that, in my opinion, this particular segment of the industry, clinical research, is extremely slow to change. And I think that comes from the pharma companies that have these huge investments in time and money for their drugs and bringing them to market. And so, again, my opinion, what happened was most of these pharma companies had their own clinical research staffs, and everything had to stay exactly the way it was because that made it through the FDA. And then in 2008, 2009, if you remember, the economy was really challenging. There was a recession or a depression, whatever you want to call it. But for the first time ever, these pharma companies got impacted by it. And they had really always been above that. Healthcare was always something that didn't get influenced by the economy. And this time they got hit. And they were told by the financial markets, by the investors in their companies, that their model was unsustainable, that $1 billion in 10 years to bring a drug to market couldn't remain. They had to find ways to do things better. And so they did. They were forced, but they finally started looking at things differently. They started using what is called CRO, a clinical research organization, which were professional organizations, and their role were to professionally run these clinical trials in a way that took advantage of scope. So not only did they see the way Abbott ran a trial, they saw the way Pfizer ran a trial, and everybody ran a trial, and they could take the best of everything and afford the technologies and the people that maybe one company would struggle with. Globalization. They really started pushing to run trials, and trials are very, very often run in many countries at the same time. My particular little company did services in 57 countries, and today it's probably way more than that. And decentralized trials took off. So just like, mainline healthcare, things are coming to the patients. And so what happened, the idea was that if you took a clinical research visit to a patient, you made it convenient in terms of time and money, they might be willing to enroll in your trial, and they might tend to stay in your trial, i.e. saving time and money in the overall research, getting the drug to market. Now, when I say decentralized clinical trials, I want to define that a little bit. There are many types. There are virtual trials where everything is done with technology, and the patient does everything themselves. There are hybrid trials where the patient goes to the clinical research site for some of the visits, and for some of the visits, they can be visited in their home by a nurse. There's telemedicine being incorporated these trials, and most recently, you've got clinics like Walgreens, which are located all over the place. And all of those things make up the idea of decentralized clinical trials. Most of them today are hybrids. In other words, participants in a trial go to the site for some of the visits, and some of the visits can come to them in their homes, in their offices, or some other convenient location.
Right.
And lastly, I would say technology, that it's huge. There are wearables, devices, all kinds of things going on out there. And David, I heard you cutting in. So Liz?
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Nikki, for that insight. A wealth of information provided. Liz, your perspective also, what is your view on, where are we at in the current state of clinical research trials today?
So I don't think I have quite as broad a world perspective as Nikki does. My focus tends to be more at a research site level.
Yes.
But
and both perspectives are good, right?
Right.
I mean, it's good
one
to
is
see
not-
things
And it
globally.
all starts there, Liz. They've got to work
Right.
together.
Exactly. And I still think that while we have a lot of exciting things that can be happening with clinical research, decentralized trials, we still don't have some of the regulatory support that we need from the government to help us understand how to do these things, how to do decentralized trials. I think from a site perspective, there are between the technology and the regulations, or lack of guidance, if you will, from the regulations, I think research sites are more challenged than ever with human resources. You have to know so much more. as a worker bee within a research site. So I don't see a lot of change yet with some of the sort of learning and educational and training aspects that we need. And I know we have a whole separate segment, related to clinical research nurses and that, but I think it's also our partners. As clinical research nurses, we partner with a heck of a lot of people. We might have somebody in a data management role. We certainly have our PIs, we have our other clinicians, we have our regulatory groups, we have technology. A lot of the nurses come from the bedside or chair side and are no longer doing direct care for the research participant. And even if they are, they've got increased technology. We just don't learn that in entry level to practice nursing. So we have this humongous learning curve, how to use an Excel spreadsheet. They sound really silly, but they do, in my opinion, impact how we are able to conduct clinical research, because we do have all of these new things and, very exciting things to do. We have an iPhone study, we have a camera study we're doing, but there's not a lot of to-dos, but the to-dos there's so many steps in them because of the added technology. And some of the, the IRB not knowing what to do when you have this other place data lives that's not in a clinical trial management system. And that's scary for IRBs, we're finding out. So I think that while there's a lot of excitement, sometimes I think we just have to be careful we're not putting the cart before the horse. So I have excitement, but a smidge of hesitation for that reason.
And Liz, I think you're right. I think the technology is very specific to given companies. And so you might be called upon to know 30 different scanners or some such nonsense.
Yeah. So,
you
hopefully that gives the
important
world a larger perspective between the two of our comments, at least for the, the rest of you attending.
No, I appreciate that that spectrum. Liz, you mentioned the government regulation that's needed. I can only imagine that that there may be, from a former CEO, some views on how that regulation should, what are the beneficial things, Nikki, that you feel could add value around the area where Liz has seen a need for more regulation?
I guess I would call it standardization, David. Because what Liz is talking about is that every study sponsor picks out a bunch of technology, and none of it probably is all that difficult. But when you have to use one day and a different one the next day, and you want me to print out a blood pressure and you want me to send it electronically, it just gets crazy. And so if there were standardization, either regulated or somehow, I think that would really help. And that would help not only the site, it would help, the nurse trying to take a visit to the home or the office or anywhere.
I mean, we get into this whole thing of the concept of what we call being engaged in clinical research. And what does that mean? And how does the IRB interpret that? And does that mean that person has to have what type of training? And is that going to be different for one study who uses one IRB, another study who's a local IRB versus an independent IRB? I mean, there's all of those things to consider that really hasn't been well hashed out. I think COVID exposed a lot of that. And I think our main regulatory agencies, if we think of OHARP and the FDA, are well aware of it. But it does take a lot to get things moving in the government.
Yeah.
So some guidance and how do we do it? And, can you, the concept of a, non-paper regulatory file for essential documents. We've got companies that provide things, but that may be prohibitive from a financial standpoint. We don't really know what the FDA's stance is on it. We've got all these sort of unknowns, and we have, one sponsor wants it one way, another sponsor wants it a different way. And so it's, I do think that the standardization is key. And I think that we have a little bit of that with CDISC, but it's not in some of the areas I think we also need it in implementation.
Well, and even little things like how much training is enough.
Right.
I really, really tried to get, a regulatory body to give me an answer on that, because we required training and some of our competitors didn't. And, of course, I was getting beat up in the market, but I felt we were doing the right thing. And I wanted a regulatory body to defend that. And I couldn't get it. It was basically, well, we'll tell you if it's not enough.
Well, and then, even, at an institution level, sometimes they don't really know what that is either.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of research sites don't have any standardization to, I'll say, the onboarding of clinical research staff. Each unit or each little entity might have something, but there's, again, not that standardization, and it makes things much more challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Great discussion. Let's turn a little bit towards the diversity, or what we're asking regarding the equity within healthcare. And, how can clinical research trials contribute to healthcare equity for all? Liz.
I don't know. Sometimes I think it's an easy answer because we have things called eligibility criteria, and they should be based on including those who would benefit and excluding those who would be harmed. But that's really not what happens. We have all of these. We want perfect research participants. We want. So I think that we could help to set sort of to take the lead if we just look at the concept of eligibility, and because to me that flattens everything. Either you can't go on it because of this, because it's going to be harmful for you. It really doesn't have anything to do with, other things. I think that that's the area that clinical research can help the most in. And obviously that would broaden the population being studied and make the intended population of the research study actually have something work for them, if we're talking about drug device biologic development, which we don't see. We see all of these, long laundry lists of criteria. And, I know that ASCO and Friends of ASCO have done a lot with oncology and recommendations, and the FDA has adopted a lot of those as guidance documents, which I think could help. But I think that, I think that we do have a way to do this a little bit better in research than we do in general healthcare because of that. We're prescriptive.
Yeah. Nikki, Liz started to kind of touch on some of the tangible things that we can do to promote equity in clinical research and drug development. What additional areas do you feel are opportunities for us to really have tangible things we can do?
I think that something Liz said in her presentation earlier, nurses and doctors are usually trusted by the general population. And I think if you are aware of someone that could benefit from clinical research, if you use the fact that you are trusted to educate, one of the biggest problems is that people don't know about clinical research. And so if you could help educate a minority group or, a group that you're trying to reach about the benefits of clinical research. And there are certain groups that don't trust research. They need it explained to them. They need to build a little confidence, and they need help understanding how to connect with a particular clinical research study. And there's all kinds of things out there now, clinicaltrials.gov. You get on the internet, there's just tons of places where you can see who's doing trials in a particular area. But I think that's a good way that nurses and doctors and healthcare professionals can really support the effort to get to other populations.
But until it's going to be tested on the boards, it's not going to be part of the nursing curriculum. And that's the sad truth. I hate to say it that way. I don't mean to be pessimistic, but we did some formative research years ago about this, and that's really kind of some of the bottom line. We really have to look at entry level to practice and how much is introduced about clinical research. You get a lot of evidence-based practice, which is using the research, but you have to understand some of the other basics first.
That's such a great point, Liz. And thank you for bringing that up. I remember going through nursing school, and frankly, I did so much of my career up to this point, even just recently, and didn't even know that this was an opening or an opportunity for me as a nurse.
Yeah.
So such a great point, and thank you for bringing that out, Liz. Nikki, Liz, we're going to see you both at the end of our presentation. You have another section, but thank you both for this insightful and thoughtful comments regarding where are we at today in clinical research. We appreciate it, and we look forward to welcoming you back as we begin to talk about the future of where we're headed in a later part of our presentation. Thank you both.
Thank you.
All right, well, now we are at the point where we are going to be heading to the next section, and this is a day in the life of clinical research nurses. And this is such an important section because it to me, it adds such value to understand and hear and know what exactly does a clinical research nurse do. That is such an important question for us all to ask. And I'm going to spotlight one of our individuals who is here with us right now. Her name is Ariel, and Ariel is a registered nurse, BSN, and she is actually part of Nurse Now staffing. So first, we're going to welcome Ariel and let you tell a little bit about your bio, Ariel, while I bring in the other participants.
Yeah. So I do work for Nurse Now, and clinical research actually just kind of fell in my lap. It was just happened by chance. I was much like yourself, David, where during nursing school, I had never heard of clinical research. Our entire practice is based off of this evidence-based practice, right? But nobody really talks about how we get to that part. How do we research those things? And I had just never heard of it. And one day I was approached by a recruiter through Nurse Now, and he asked me, I had infusion experience, and he asked me if I would be interested in this part of nursing that, I, like I said, never heard of. So I was like, sure, I'd like to hear more, and jumped head first, had a huge learning curve. There was a lot of things that I had never even heard of, but it is such an exciting part of nursing, and I love talking about it to all of my nurse friends and trying to get them involved in it, because it is just extremely exciting, and I love watching the growth.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining, Ariel, and being part of our discussion. Next, we have Laura Baker, who is honoring us with her presence while on vacation. So thank you so much, Laura, for being here. And if you could give a little about your background.
Sure. Hi everyone. I'm so glad to see you all. So I'm Laura Baker. I'm currently the president for the International Association of Clinical Research Nurses, and I also am the senior director for clinical research integration at Seattle Children's. I've been working as a clinical research nurse for the last just about 15 years. My mom was a clinical research nurse, and that's sort of, the apple did not fall far from the tree. I just sort of have always felt like you got to know all the secrets before they were out. And I've always really enjoyed the variety that clinical research gives you. I think it's one of the few areas of nursing that just allows you to see such a breadth of patient populations. And so I also have just fallen in love with it and really enjoy the roles that I get to serve in now to really support advancing clinical research nurse and clinical research infrastructure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for being here. Next, we have Dr. Lovey from Randomize Now. Great joy to have you here, Dr. Lovey. If you could give us a little bit about your background.
Yes. Hi, David. Hello to everyone again. If I go out here, let me know. I did run like my speed test and everything. So it said it was good. I followed instructions. But so yes, I come to you all from Randomize Now. I am the executive director for a clinical research site. We are primarily based in Peachtree City, Georgia. So if you're familiar with Atlanta at all, we're kind of off the 75 south end of that, about 30 minutes from the city. And so our company did not recreate the wheel as far as clinical research, but what makes us stand out a little bit more is that we do look to increase the amount of Black people that participate in clinical research. So while we were kind of establishing our pillars and establishing our model for the company and starting to enroll and doing really great numbers with getting people of color into research, we also identified another area of research, which is geriatrics and patients that are living under the poverty line. So my expertise I bring to the company is I started as a clinical research nurse at Emory School of Medicine. And so I was a bedside nurse at Grady and had a biology degree before and tried to find a way to kind of really combine science, I guess, and nursing, and just found this great collaboration with them. So that's where I get my clinical research nurse experience from, enrolling patients in emergency medicine studies. So this is kind of a laid back division of nursing for me because I get to do like telemedicine, and now I'm a nurse practitioner. So I get to work as a sub-I, and it's a lot of paperwork, but I still do get to really engage with the patients. So I'm excited to be here, and thank you all for having me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lovey. And that really leads us to one of our first questions here. What does the day of a clinical research nurse look like? And we'll kick off with you, Dr. Lovey. It sounds like it's a lot of paperwork from what you're describing, but I'm hoping that it's more than that too.
Correct. Yes. And so I think that we have some really great other perspectives in the room to include the other speakers. So if you all don't mind, I'll try to take as much as the, I guess, insight from maybe a nurse practitioner perspective. So that way we'll kind of cover everything. So again, started off as a bedside nurse. And so now working in like more of the sub-I role as a nurse practitioner. So I will say that not every CRO and every sponsor is really open to nurse practitioners being sub-I on trials. But our company has identified a few that do actually really like the engagement. They like the styles and the tactics of nurse practitioners. So I'm actually a PI for the third time on an industry funded trial. And so how does my day look? Very coordinator related. So I'm still enrolling patients in trials. However, I kind of have that added benefit of being able to do the assessment parts, right, of studies. So a lot of our studies do require that we do full body assessments for each visit. So as a licensed practitioner, I'm able to do that. Additionally, just having the knowledge from being a nurse and also the added knowledge of being a nurse practitioner, I'm actually acute care and family practice. I can look at the medication regimens that they're on and really be able to make sure that the IP won't conflict with that. So of course, having the initial insight from the PI, but a lot of times our PIs are really busy. So the great thing about being a nurse practitioner is that a nurse practitioner PI is that we have more time and we have more experience with sitting down with the patients and really giving that bedside care. So that's really how my day looks from a sub-I perspective. Again, the coordination and then the assessments and making sure that the way that us as practitioners report our findings into the different platforms, that it's medical knowledge, that it's understandable, and that if we're ever audited, that those things are in line with what's required to continue on as a very successful and great reporting site. So that's from an EMP perspective. I would love to hear about where I come from the nursing side.
No, that's great. I appreciate that. And Laura, I know you're in the hospital setting and working around clinicians that are close to the bedside. But what does your day look like in that type of setting? I'm imagining you have a site-based aspect to what you do, but also engaging with the data as well.
Yeah, certainly. I think, one of the most, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, I think one of the most attractive features of being a clinical research nurse is just the variety and the variety of patient populations that you get to interact with, as well as sort of the variety within your day-to-day. So there's a lot of, I think, one of the advantages of the clinical research nurse role, as opposed to a bedside nurse role, is you really get to move along that journey of the clinical trial with the participant. So it's, in some regards, it's sort of like a care coordination aspect. You get to walk with them from, approaching them about a research opportunity all the way to having them complete their component of the research trial. So I think that is a really special and unique role to get to walk beside the patients in that journey. One that, as opposed to a bedside nurse where you sort of, work with them for the period that they were inpatient or in whatever setting that you're working in. So I think that's a really unique component. And I think, the variety, who knows what the day will look like. You have monitoring visits, you have patient visits, you have data entry. There's a lot of components to the clinical research nurse role that aren't just exclusively patient care, that aren't just exclusively regulatory work. But it's really sort of the blend of those two coming together that I think, makes the clinical research nurse role really unique.
Thank you, Laura, for that insight. Ariel, I know you have had many varied experiences. What does your day-to-day look like as you engage with patients as a clinical research nurse?
Yeah, so much like was mentioned prior, there's a lot of variety in the role. When you're bedside, you kind of have your tasks that you're doing every single day, and your day's pretty redundant. You're doing a lot of the same things, but mobile clinical research is a lot of different things just thrown into one little piece. So your day is different every single day, but at the same time, you're building these relationships with these patients that you're seeing across a period of time. Some trials can go for, years, and you're in their home, which is a very intimate experience. They're allowing you into your home, you're building this relationship with them, and then also using your nursing skills that you've gained prior. So a lot of it can be you're in their home doing their assessments, giving them an infusion or the medication, what have you. And then you're kind of a jack of all trades too. You're doing the work of a lot of different parts of healthcare, right? So in the hospital, you would have your pharmacist that is mixing your drug for you. But in the field, when you're in their homes, you're getting the shipment in your home prior to the visit. You're gathering all of your supplies, getting all of your things ready prior to going over to their home, and then mixing that drug in their home. You're giving them the infusion or the medication in their home as well. And then if you're doing lab draws, you also have to process that in their home as well. So you're tasked with carrying around all of this equipment, like a centrifuge, which I had never heard of before. I felt, the first time I had done it, I was like, oh my gosh, I am a whole scientist over here, just drawing their blood and then centrifuging it in their home. And then you have to explain this to the patient as you're doing it because they're watching you, they've never seen this. So it's a lot, but it is so much fun and there's so much variety to it. I love it.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I remember carrying that first centrifuge myself. It was quite an experience. So Laura, what would you say are, it sounds like that's one of the unique challenges, frankly, but what would you say are some additional challenges to the hybrid and the fully remote trial visits? I don't know if you've had a lot of experience personally, but do you see, is there a role in the work you do of a hybrid trial or a fully remote visit in what you do currently?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, so Seattle Children's, clearly in Seattle, Washington, we serve like a 5-state region. So we really had to think about clinical research visits differently during the pandemic. We have lots of families that are living in Montana and Idaho and over in sort of Eastern Washington. So Alaska, so many hours and states away from where they may be receiving sort of their specialized care. And so, yes, the pandemic certainly had to, it changed the way that we did our trial visits. We thought very long and hard about the visits that we actually brought the patients and families to Seattle for. And then wherever possible, we were trying to do these visits using local labs, shipping, drug, wherever that was allowed. So I do think that there is definitely a place for hybrid research visits, especially because I think that, speaking to some of the earlier questions about just sort of lowering the burden that research participation puts on families. They have to take days off to bring their loved ones to a visit. It's clinical research visits can be quite burdensome to families. And so I think, that the pandemic has really sort of put a fine point on that in thinking about ways that we can make clinical trials more accessible for everyone.
That's so true, Laura, and it's great to hear, the work that you and your team are doing to help engage with participants. What we normally in nursing call patients are called participants in this field of clinical research nursing. So it's so important to engage with them, I believe, in a way that reflects and supports them. And it's great to hear that you're doing that kind of work there at Seattle Children's. So Dr. Lovey, what I think it's interesting to me, you've been through the education side of things, and I would imagine in that process understood the scope of practice at each level that you've worked in. What do you believe that there are, what additional things? I know, Ariel was mentioning the centrifuge, but are there other things that clinical research nurses can be doing that are still within their scope of practice, they're able to legally do, but may not be doing today?
Yes, glad you asked that question. I have to backtrack just a little bit. I was really excited. I get so fired when we talk about decentralized trials because it works. It works. It has just increased. I know, I believe Ms. Nikki was talking about the 25% non-compliance or patients not completing the trials. And we are really decreasing those numbers. And I can speak firsthand for Randomized now because using that decentralized model. And how does that look? Is just really having the resources to be able to get to the patients so that they can really participate from the comfort of their own homes, right? And so for example, I like to do business with CROs that have that will provide resources, I guess you could say, so that patients are not, what is the word? So they're able to participate in these trials. So for example, one of the CROs provides cell phones and iPhones for all the participants that participate so that they're connected with the telehealth visit. So another kind of added role as a sub-I or a nurse practitioner in clinical research, we can do telemedicine visits with these patients. And so a lot of times the kind of person I am, I find myself being primary care to them also. So you'll be surprised the amount of times I'm like, okay, that is not my task today. But just wanted to piggyback off of what they said. Like, it is really the solution to a lot of the non-compliance and the patients failing to complete studies. So we are definitely in a new role. And I just want to tell Miss Nikki, you're my new Shiro, because she gave us that history the other day, you know, about how she was really the first one that kind of charted that idea. And now we're actually using it. So thank you so much. But to go back to your question, David, to talk about some of the additional roles, and I'm glad you brought that up. One of my favorite, which is actually one that I've participated in one of our trials, is being an unblinded coordinator as a nurse, right? So for some sites, they do have unblinded pharmacists, and for some protocols, they do say you have to have a pharmacist, but for some of the studies, you don't. So this one particular study we had, which is a vaccine trial, I serve as an unblinded coordinator for that study. And what that allows me to do on that side is, for one, you know, be able to review the medications from the patients, you know, and give my insight from that side on their medical history. But additionally, I can give the medications and I can actually administer the IP. So then we get to tap back into our nursing skills with that, right? So that's a very interesting and unique role that you don't really see very commonly. It's a lot of paperwork with that one as well, but not as much as the blinded side of things. So I do enjoy being a part of that study. And then lastly, I have another role that I kind of jotted down here, is being a training advocate or a training coordinator. And so what does that look like as a nurse? Well, since most of us are coming from the bedside, we're coming from the hospitals, we're coming from private practice, we really understand bedside manner. And we understand how to get patients to feel comfortable with whatever treatment plan there is, right? And so it takes extra effort for research studies, especially in my community and being in the Black community, is that it's a little bit different conversation we have when we come to the bedside for medical research, especially in an acute care setting. Like I said, I came from emergency medicine. So a lot of my studies were getting up in the middle of the night, trying to enroll a traumatic brain injury patient and trying to get the family to say, hey, I need you to understand research in the next 5 minutes. I need you to sign this consent within the next hour, because he has to get, you know, if you all do consent, we need to get this device implanted in the next 2 hours type thing, right? So a very challenging environment. But so when I say training coordinator, you really need these nurses to do in-services for like the hospital staff and the clinic staff that are non-research staff, because they too have to be stakeholders that have some buy-in to show that we're all on one page in front of the patient. And that is so important, because I have been in front of, you know, 3 nurses that was working on one patient in an emergency situation. And here I come in with my research packet, and they really did not see the value in what I was doing. So I went back to the drawing table in that situation to make sure we first educated those departments on what we were doing to get their buy-in. And we definitely start to see their enrollments. We also start to see more referrals come in, where nurses were actually calling the research cell phone saying, hey, we got a patient that may qualify for this trial. So those are 2 new, unique roles, I thought. It's something else you kind of don't think about when you think about clinical research nursing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lovey, and Ariel Davis and Laura Baker. Thank you so much for joining and being a part of this day in the life of a clinical research nurse. Each of your perspectives are unique, and we appreciate your participation in this project.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you all.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, now this brings us to the next section, which is what does it take to become a clinical research nurse? And we are, I'll be bringing on the participants for that section here now. The first one is Lashana, and Lashana, if you are available to, let me check here. There you're right at the top. Look at you. Well done. Well done. I'm going to pin you right on there. And while you're pinned, and I'll bring in the other 2 participants, if you could give a little background for for everybody of your bio, if you would, please, LaShawna. Thank you so much for being here.
Sure. Thank you for having me, David. So I have been in the clinical research arena for about 20 years. I was actually a coordinator before I became a nurse, and I have been a manager. So my current role is clinical trials manager at Houston Methodist Academic Institute in the Texas Medical Center. And, my day-to-day is essentially running the daily operations in the departments that I actually manage. I have the opportunity to work with many wonderful research nurses, coordinators, data specialists, etc. So my specialty is in investigational devices as well as drug trials. So from study startup all the way to closeout. So I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, LaShawna, for joining us and representing Houston Methodist so well. Next, we'll go over to Lauren, and Lauren is from Clinical Research Fast Track. If you could give us a little of your background, your bio.
Awesome. Thanks, David. And thank you everyone for joining today. I'm really excited to discuss this topic. So as David mentioned, I'm Lauren. I'm our Vice President of Strategic Growth at Clinical Research Fast Track. But I started many years ago in clinical research at University of North Carolina. I got to not only coordinate, but try my hand at writing protocols, doing tons of data analysis, publications, which eventually led to some policy reform, which I don't think is something most people set out to do in clinical research. We're always, preoccupied with safety and efficacy, but we can make impact in a lot of different ways. And then most recently was at Mayo Clinic in the Cancer Center there. Before joining Fast Track full-time, what I do here is really oversee our curriculum development and execution, as well as mentoring our students who come through our program. These are more entry-level clinical research professionals looking to move into the field, and they run into that catch-22 of you can't get a job without experience, and you can't get experience without a job. And as we all know, or most of us probably know, it's getting increasingly more competitive to find a position in the field of clinical research. Even for a research assistant position, they're requiring, 6 to 12 months of experience. I'm not sure what the pre-research assistant position is, but if anyone knows, let me know. But what we're doing is helping to bridge that gap so people can get a start and really make that difference in the field. So it's great to be here.
All right. Well, thanks, Lauren. Janelle, thank you for joining. It's great to have Janelle Rodriguez Brewer here, also from Clinical Research Fast Track. If you could give us a little of your background for everyone here, a little bit of your bio before we jump into the questions.
Yes, thank you again for having me. It's so nice to see some familiar faces in the room as well. Like David said, I am Janelle Rodriguez Brewer, and I am the Clinical Research Education Manager here at Clinical Research Fast Track. So like everyone else, I started off, popped into research, didn't really know that this was the field I was going to be going into, but 6 years later, I can't complain. I absolutely love it. I'm a nerd for research. And that's where I ended up finding my absolute passion, which is education and clinical research. So really getting people to find out about this industry, being a mentor in, how that looks like for everyone, right? There's so many different roles in this field, and it's not always the same for everyone. Some people want that patient facing. Some people are like, nope, I'm totally done with patients and I don't want to see them anymore. So I love that about this field, that there's so many different opportunities. And then of course, just being that mentor for people, whether it's just getting into the field or doing more of that advancement, maybe it's moving on to the next role. But yeah, I'm excited to be here and let everybody know about this great secret of clinical research.
Absolutely, and the demand and need for it is so much increasing, as we've seen drugs needing to come to market so much faster than they ever have. So, Janelle, we'll start with you. Can you speak a little bit to the educational programs that are available to enhance and help people grow their knowledge of clinical research in this field, to feel that level of confidence to be able to do the work that needs to be done?
Yeah, absolutely. And at Clinical Research Fast Track, I know we have a couple different programs depending on what that background may look like for some. But we do definitely specialize in learning those fundamentals so that people do feel confident going into it, because we know that clinical research is, a total different space, right, than just the clinic field. There's so many different regulations and concepts. And so we really pride on ourselves in, getting people out there to feel confident in what they're doing when they're getting these roles, whether it's a clinical research nurse or regulatory or safety, so many different options there. But, there is, I would always say, is like, do some digging yourself, look at what the roles are out there and try to figure out what speaks to you. Is it getting away from that bedside, or is it still, getting more intimate with the patient? I know I've heard several speakers say that, which they loved about it is, these nurses come from the hospitals and it's, patient after patient after patient. And it's like, time is money. You don't even have time to stop and get to know them. And I think that's what surprises most of our nurses who come in from that bedside, where they're like, oh, I get to have that interaction with patients where it's, I'm taking my time, I get to know them. It's so much more special. And I'm sure, my nurses and coordinators in this room know that they've, had doctors even come to them and be like, I don't know half the things that about these these patients. So I just think that's beautiful. So I would say, if you're interested in research, do your own research, figure out what that means. And like I said, we have opportunities here, different programs. It might be right around the corner at your hospital. Some people don't even realize that there's research embedded in the companies that they work for. And then, give us a call if you want to feel more confident. Maybe it's about getting that advancement. What's that next step looks like?
Thank you so much, Janelle. LaShawna, I know you've taken this journey. Can you speak a little bit about the arc of that education and where did that knowledge come from? Because I'm sure it didn't just singularly come from one place. It was kind of a culmination of multiple ways that you gained that knowledge in that arc of education. Could you speak to that for us a little bit?
Absolutely. I'll be happy to do that. I too, just like many on this call, fell into research. I was at the right place at the right time. I think because they saw a background in science. So my first degree, just like Dr. Levy, was a biology degree. And of course, you can basic science track, you could tell me about, I could talk about that all day, but clinical research was never, ever discussed or mentioned or even knew it was a viable career option. So when I was introduced to what a clinical research coordinator, I'm like, sure, sounds like science. I love it. I love being able to help people. So I was able to be self-taught at a clinic, a private clinic setting that I was in. Fortunately, the lead coordinator had extensive history, extensive experience. And I remember her giving me the ACRP handbook and told me to just read through it, study it, I'll test you. And then you'll start implementing the skills that you learn. So I was able to learn directly on the job. And then, of course, fast forwarding that to deciding to go to nursing school and taking that experience and that knowledge that we learn to become a nurse, and of course, evidence-based nursing. It's also not taught clinical research nursing in the nursing track that I went to. I am finding more nursing schools, not a lot, but there are some that does introduce clinical research. But I do think that it should be introduced, as Dr. I believe it was Liz and Nikki said earlier, well earlier into these programs so that they can know that is a viable option. So a lot of mine was on the job learning. And once getting into the field, taking advantage of multiple programs, you have IACRN, you have ACRP, just connecting with those like-minded individuals like yourself and being able to move forward in your career. So it's a gamut of things. I wish there was a fast track, a clinical fast track when I was in starting out. I think that would have helped me tremendously because it was growing pains, and be okay with those growing pains that actually come with changing those positions, but your skills as a nurse is very much transferable to what we do in clinical research nursing, from site levels, and you have site levels that's clinics, and you have site levels that are hospitals. So it's a gamut of positions out there. And on top of that, you have industry as well. So I think there is many options that's out there, and the opportunities, as Janelle mentioned, you just have to research what you want to do. It's endless opportunities.
That's so true, Lashana, and thank you for sharing that journey that you have taken. Lauren, I really, I think one of the things that jumped out to me about what Lashana was saying was, was the transferable skills, and I was hoping maybe you could speak to how you're encountering that transferable skill levels that nurses are bringing into your organization there at Clinical Research Fast Track, and what are some of the values of those transferable skills, and what are they?
think I'm going to take this question because Lauren messaged me, said that her computer froze. It gave her that wheel of death. But I'll happily talk about that. I always tell our students, be passionate about whatever you do. And that's a huge skill that we like to teach, but also, be confident in the things that you've learned. My nurses always do super well in clinical research because they have that hard training in things like medical terminology, or even just, patient advocacy. And so there's such a better learning curve for those people because they know so much more. They know what it looks like to enter in data. They know these procedures, this terminology. And so I would say, the biggest thing is, be eager to learn and be trainable, because you're going to learn new things in clinical research, and stay passionate, be hungry for that. I always tease my students too that I think this field is full of forever learners, because a few other people in this room said, like, I love that it's constantly new information, right? We're constantly at the forefront of what's new, what's happening. And not to mention, there's just so much growth and advancement here in this field, so much potential for, those higher earning jobs. So, if you are one of those people listening in who's like, yeah, I'm ready for that, don't just look up nursing jobs, right? Look up clinical research jobs, because there's going to be a lot of jobs that are looking for people with that medical background. And if you're a nurse, you might be on top of that list, because they're going to be thinking to themselves, you know what, they've got so much more that I don't have to train them on. And so, your background just alone being a nurse is going to be a huge transferable skill over to clinical research.
That's so true, Janelle, and thank you so much for sharing that. Lashana, I wanted to highlight a little bit of your background. You said you came from the CRC role and then into nursing. What I'm sure you've seen it done other ways, but what propelled you, or what motivated you to take the path that you took versus some nurses that may not have that CRC background, the value that adds. Can you speak to a little bit about that aspect of your journey?
Yes, absolutely. So I don't find a lot of nurses that have my background going from a CRC to a nurse role, and then become a clinical research nurse, but I don't think that should be a rate limiting step by all means. I think for me, having the passion of science and wanting to help someone was my basis. And once I was introduced to clinical research and knew that I can kind of do it all and be able to follow my patients long term and not get, I guess, burnt out from the day-to-day of caring for a patient for my 12-hour shifts and then leave, and then I have a whole nother set of patients. So I think that, there are many ways to be able to kind of tackle that and still be successful without having the background in clinical research. As a coordinator, nurses, we really get into the field for multiple reasons, but primarily it's because we want to help. We want to be a part of helping a patient or patients. And in research is helping our research participants or our subjects and really moving medicine forward. I think that's really the desire that you really need to be able to get in and work as a research nurse or research coordinator. And by the way, clinical research nurses, depending on the positions you're going for and the locations, it may be a little bit different. The word research coordinator may be for a research nurse or a registered nurse that's acting as a coordinator. A clinical research nurse could be doing budgets and contracts in addition to seeing the patients in the regulatory perspective. So there is no one title per se. It's very important to really look at those job descriptions and think about what you do on a day-to-day basis as a nurse, regardless of how much experience you have, what degrees you have. Think about that, look at those positions, and really, really be very confident, as Janelle said, and sell those skills because it is a desperate need for us to really embark on this wonderful career in clinical research. And we need those individuals like nurses that have that clinical experience that can easily learn the protocols and be able to deliver them if that's the role that you're in. So I wish that we again had this introduced to more programs and nursing programs. Hopefully before I retire, we'll have a large number of them in nursing schools throughout the U.S.
Absolutely. Yeah, those are that's so important to even know that it's possible. It's a great thing to be exposed to, and the earlier the better, I believe. Lauren, from your background, you deal with a lot of nurses, but you also deal with a lot of people that are not nurses in your training. What are some unique challenges that nurses have in that process of gaining the knowledge to be feeling the comfort levels that they are able to work within clinical research? What are some of the challenges that nurses face in your program that maybe people that aren't nurses don't necessarily have as challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I know, sorry, my computer turned into a brick there for a second, but hopefully we're unbricked now. But it is a great question. So some of the challenges we see when nurses do go out into the field to try to seek out these jobs, and one big obstacle our training helps them to overcome is that when people are hiring into these positions, particularly for clinical research nurse, like patient-facing positions, or even behind the scenes, they say, okay, well, you have this great skill set, you know how to document, you know how to work with patients, but this is research. You actually have to slow it down. The documentation is a little different. You might be used to the hustle and bustle of seeing, 40, 50 patients a day. Here, you might see 1 or 2 a day if you're working in, something like oncology or transplant. It's just a very different way of thinking, right? You're not here to treat. You're here to run protocol. Or if, maybe you're in the position of a CRA, you're there to make sure the protocol is being run, the regulations are being followed, regulatory is up to standard, the IP is checking out, right? So it's just a whole different way of thinking about how to be a nurse. You're not there to treat. If the patient comes in saying, I'm having just the worst headaches, you're not there to kind of intervene. You're there to check what the protocol says and record those adverse events. And so in our classroom, in teaching this material, that's one thing we certainly say, okay, I need you to turn off that side of your brain that says, I'm here to treat, and say, okay, what does the protocol say? How do we collect this really clean, credible data? How do we document that? And a lot of our students are very receptive to that. And that's actually part of what they're looking for in this career shift, is to kind of slow it down and be able to make that connection with the participants and with their families. And for our students who want to be more behind the scenes, so many of them do have that great attention to detail. And part of the reason they're maybe leaving bedside now is they don't have the time in that clinic setting to actually live out their personality, live out their gifts, because they're constantly being hustled through. So those are the main challenges we see. And then in an earlier conversation we had, a lot of our nurses, it's so interesting, they need help learning to advocate for themselves. They need help learning how their skill set transfers into the clinical research setting. Need help saying, look, I know how to talk to doctors. that is a skill set. Like shout that from the rooftops if you've done that, right? I know how to work in these teams. More than anything, I know how to get stuff done. Like I am so effective. Use me as a tool. I will be the best hire that you've ever chosen. So it's learning to say, I have all these skills to bring to the table. Give me a shot. I'm going to just, knock your socks off.
Awesome. No, that's so great. I appreciate that input, Lauren. And LaShawna, I know, as a nurse yourself, there's got to be times where that friction between, what you're there for and what the participant may think that you're there for. How do you navigate those successfully? Because the desire and the will to treat has got to be, at times, you want to treat the problem, but you also have to, do what the study structure says you have to do. So.
Yes, that can definitely be challenging. I think it gets better the more you do it. But initially, really educating yourself on what that modality or drug or device is, educating your patients on what it is and the purpose. What I find a lot of times is, this is standard of care. Why am I participating in this study that's testing this something that's new to the standard of care, right? My true answer each and every time is, in order for us to move forward in science, we do have to have these sort of trials to have a comparator to a standard of care to know if it's as good or better. Our physicians are going to take the best care of you. This is an option for you. You're not required. This is totally voluntary. So, I could say that probably with my eyes closed time and time again. So I really think that that understanding these protocols, and remember, it's an open book test. You don't have to remember it off the top of your head. You get all of these specific trainings, whether or not you're working industry, you're working for the government, or if you're working at a site where your physicians actually wrote the protocol, right? It's even better because they know the protocol in and out. So I really think that, understanding what your purpose is and reminding yourself, keeping all of those clinical knowledge that you obtain, but now you have to put your clinical research hat on. Yes, you're a clinician, but you need your research hat on of all of that documentation of still understanding what nurses do, because you have that educator part that you potentially may have, that you got to go talk to those departments about a 300-page protocol that you need to drop it down to one, right? To explain to them, what do you need to do that day? What is that patient going to look like when they come out of the procedure after they have this device implanted into them? So having that knowledge, taking that time to educate yourself will make it so much easier, and it gets better and better. But remember, it's research. So nobody have all of the answers. We're learning and we're questioning as we go along, and staying in very, very close communication with your investigators, your management teams, mentors in the field will really make it much easier as you navigate the role within itself.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that insight, LaShawna. It's so practical and very applicable to what clinical research nurses do. So thank you so much for being a part of this discussion today. With that, we are going to turn over briefly for a very special announcement from Janelle and Lauren regarding a super surprise for everyone that's attending. You have a very unique surprise. I'm pretty sure they're pretty excited about it, even though they have no idea what it is yet, right?
This is awesome. Thanks, David. So I know some of you may already be working in the field, and so maybe you have a colleague that this would help empower. But for those of you who are looking to get into the research field, we'd like to offer everyone who is here a $1,000 scholarship to our training program. Of course, you would have to apply and be accepted into the training program, but we'd like to make that offer to all of you. You're clearly here very interested in either learning more about the research field, or about, breaking in. And so Janelle shared with us how to get in touch with us. But again, if you are accepted into our program and this is something you want to pursue, if you're new to the research field, we do want to offer that great thing to you. So just whenever you talk to us, mention that you joined this webinar. That's all you have to do. So Janelle, I don't know, would you like to add anything?
No, I think you did a great job. I would just say, even if there's any questions about getting to the field or career advancement, we would love to talk about it. It is truly our passion. We can talk about it for hours. So any questions, concerns, love notes, give us a call. We'd love to talk about it more.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Janelle and Lauren, for that that generous offer. I did put in the chat so that everyone can see the ability for you to be able to use that link I put in the chat to go right to the admissions section. So it's a great opportunity. We'd love to have as many people that want to are open to be able to participate in that. So thank you so much to Clinical Research Fast Track and their partnership with us and sponsoring what we're doing here today and helping nurses advance their education in clinical research nursing. So with that, we're going to begin the start of our next section, and this is about the future. So we talked about the past before, we've talked about the present, we've talked about education, and now we are ready to begin talking about the future. And the very first person that I will be introducing in the future will be Michael Keynes. Michael Keynes is a great friend, and looks like he's in a wooded cabin somewhere up north, I'm guessing. But Michael, if you would, but while I bring the other two participants in, Nikki and Liz, if you'd give a little bit about your bio. Liz and Nikki gave theirs at the beginning, but we'll get an update on your biographical background for us, please.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, David, and thanks for having me. And glad to be participating in this panel with Nikki and Liz. I'm Mike Keynes. I'm in Wisconsin, so your eye does not deceive you. Yeah. So I've been in the clinical research industry for a little over 20 years. Half of that time I've been in the operations section and the program management side. And the other half, I've been in the executive and commercial side, so I've seen multiple angles of the clinical trial industry. More particularly after serving 10 years at PRA International, which is now part of ICON, several years at Syneos, so very large contract research organizations. I then took a diversion into home care and working with nurses and nursing agencies in the administration of activities from clinical protocols in the home. So I served as the chief operating officer for a company called Pharma Clinical that has a home health component to it. I spent a year and a half as the VP of global operations for ICON's decentralized clinical trial offering. ICON's a very large CRO. And for the last year, I've been actually on the software side. So as David knows, I'm a big fan of looking into the future and trying to figure out where things are going to go. And excited to be part of the group that's participating in this panel to talk about those items. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, Michael. So we'll kick off with Nikki Norris. What is the future of clinical research? What do we, you've been at the ground level in the operations side, leading, large organizations and doing tremendous things. What do you see as the next thing from your perspective, Nikki, that is yet to come? You're on mute. Sorry, Nikki, you're on mute. My apologies. I didn't tell you that already.
I'm sorry.
I didn't catch it.
You've already heard that I feel strongly about this concept of decentralized clinical trials. And I think it's going to grow. It's going to continue. There's going to be more variations. I described some of the variations being done today, and what you're going to have is a new variation, I think, added in with clinics as a part of the mix, and we're all going to have to learn together. So that's a huge one for me. And I just saw a survey of pharmaceutical executives in this particular area. And they said 73% of their trials moving forward will have the concept of decentralized in them, which is just huge.
Wow. Yeah, that so is. Liz, I know you're on the government side, but you've also been in a contractor role previously, and in your years of nursing, what do you see as the next things that are coming? Maybe even not necessarily just from a government standpoint, because clearly I'm sure you'd have great insight there, but also in the general area of clinical research as a whole. What do you see coming?
I really think it's kind of around the whole decentralized trials, telehealth. I really think that's where things are moving towards, and probably a little faster than we can really get a good handle on. Again, we had talked earlier about standards, and I think that everyone's moving very quickly, and we want to, use our technology to be able to do this. And I just think that, we just have to kind of slow down a little bit maybe and catch up. But I do worry about clinical research nurses in the extent that, we're going to face a shortage of nurses. And I think we're going to see, potentially the ability to have less nurses involved in clinical research just as the numbers of nurses decrease. So I think that tips into clinical research, certainly, and then the training of a variety of other potential disciplines. And while I know, there are programs out there, bachelor programs, baccalaureate programs, as well as master programs around clinical research, I think there is certainly a value added for the nurse with certain types of trials in particular.
Michael, how about your perspective on where we're headed in clinical research? I know you've spoken extensively on this subject. So what would you say the best and most important things you would bring to bear for the audience of clinical research nurses that we have gathered here today?
Yeah, thanks, David. And I'll put in a shameless self plug and promotion on my LinkedIn profile. I do have a presentation that I gave in February of this year, speaking to what I think the research trends are going to be in decentralized trial and clinical research over the next 12 to 15 months. So David's already seen that, and NurseNow is mentioned in there as well as other nursing individuals, and so I think it's a good audience read. But I think to that point, a lot of flexibility, and I think what we've seen in the industry, and Liz was speaking a little bit to this as well as Nikki, there was a lot of hope to be able to make structures of clinical trials easier for patients and to some degree for site staff and nurses, using elements that maybe were not always included before, but there were technological limitations or regulatory limitations or regulatory comfort with fully implementing that. And then COVID occurred, and it was like a massive acceleration into the complete other end of the spectrum. And so, where everything can be done outside of the clinic with any piece of technology or personnel, because of the health system status is sometimes being shut down. But now I think, you're starting, as with anything, the pendulum goes back a little bit. And to Liz's point, maybe it's more about a thoughtful incorporation of these different approaches, both at the site level for the research staff and potentially in the home for the patients. And so, I think at the end of the day, what you're going to see is a lot of increase. So increase in use of technology, increase in complexity of visits that could be done in the home or the clinic because of the incorporation of technology, and the comfort that regulatory bodies now have with expanding where patients may be seen, whether they're seen in the home, in the clinic, or as Nikki mentioned, in a tertiary type facility. That said, I think, and those are all positives, I think, with a lot of flexibility. The negative, I'll say, or the challenge will be, especially I think as a clinical research nurse, is now that there's so many more groups that are involved in these types of services and offerings, you're probably going to see an increase in the variability of what these organizations are asking you for. So if you're working with the same piece of technology, you might have 3 different groups that are also deploying that as well, and how they want you to use it and how they want you to interact with them is going to change. So I think the variability is going to be a bit of a challenge in the clinical trial space that maybe we didn't see before. But overall, I agree with Nikki's comment about pharmaceutical companies looking for more of a decentralized or hybrid option. And I definitely agree with Liz as well that there needs to be a bit more of a thoughtful consideration before these other additional items are just, included without thinking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Michael. Liz, I know you work with a lot of clinical research nurses in the work that you do. What is, what can clinical research nurses do today to prepare for the role that they'll be playing in the future? What are some active steps that they can take? What advice would you give?
So, I mean, I'm just a big proponent of just learning. I think that the more information you have, the more knowledge you have, the more armed you will be to make an informed decision about something at work, changing your career path from, a bedside to away from the bedside. I think that I'm just not sure, aside from that, what else. I just am a big proponent of learning and stepping outside the comfort zone, learning about things that that don't impact you now. And I think that's sort of the key. You might not have decentralized trials at your organization, but you're going to get them at some point. So why not be prepared? Start learning about them. What do they mean? If you have an ability to attend a webinar, things like that. I think it's more that true continuing professional development learning rather than what do I need to know to do my job now. I think it's that forward thinking. And, I guess I would also add pray for funding, because many of our jobs are a little soft sometimes.
Yes.
And that's the reality of it. And that's what can make it unsettling sometimes for some, but there is that component of the research.
Yeah.
Nikki, funders.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I'm a complete agreement. The research won't happen without the funds. And I know, Nikki, you've done so much to really turn the industry yourself, through sheer will and brute force, as you discussed earlier in our call today. But, what recommendations would you give to clinical research nurses on how they can, take that initiative and that proactive approach that you've taken, to move an industry? How can they apply that to their individual roles that they play?
I was struck by the conversation today with all the different variations that people have in their backgrounds based on how they're practicing research, where they're practicing research. I mean, are you a coordinator? Are you a data management person? Are you in education? This thing offers so many opportunities. I would suggest that a good place to start is start networking with each other and learning about what's out there and how your skill set might best be used. I mean, maybe it's working for one of these decentralized companies. Maybe it's working for one of the CROs and looking at protocols as to what really can be done and what can't be done. There's just so many ways that your nursing backgrounds allow you to participate and be incredibly valuable.
Yeah, so true. Michael, I really will reserve the last comment for you on the future of where you see, what are the final thoughts regarding your futuristic thinking about clinical research and clinical research nursing?
Yeah, thanks, David. And I mean, I echo the comments earlier from Nikki and Liz. I think having a research background and a nursing background on top of that are two tremendous areas where you can add value. And having been at larger contract research organizations, I can tell you that perspective is in short supply. There are people that are familiar with traditional operations, but understanding what it means to treat someone or have a patient care component of your job is not a majority opinion of exposure and experience inside those organizations. So being able to reference your background is enormous. That said, I think for the healthcare perspective in clinical trials, it's going to be a more of an acceleration of where things are already going. I mean, the increasing use of technology, which has been increased for sure with DCT and post-COVID, but it was already heading there with electronic medical records and Epic and Cerner and all these other systems that were done by charting previously on paper. So it's a natural progression. I think individuals, to really maximize where you are and to fully leverage your experience, being comfortable with technology is really important moving forward. Your perspective is really important, and I would say use your voice. The thing that can be frustrating with all of these companies that are entering in the space in clinical research is you feel like you get a lot thrown at you. Whether you're a home nurse or whether you're a nurse in a clinic or a coordinator, you're going to get a lot at you. You have an important voice. And so to be able to share that both for things that are working or not, or to say, I don't understand what you want me to do, you need to be much more clear. The clinical research space moves very quickly, as you guys all know. And so, reminding people that they can't just throw things across at you is hugely helpful. So I think we're going to see more of the same. I do think we'll have a bit more measured pace moving forward as organizations become a little bit more mature. But I agree completely with Liz and Nikki. Leverage that background as a clinical research nurse, whether in your current role to help make your day-to-day better, what you're being asked to do, or when you look in broadening your career opportunities as well. And certainly to the networking side, I mean, I'm always happy to network if individuals like to reach out over LinkedIn. It is a very small universe. Nikki and I knew each other well before this discussion today, just through the industry, and David and I as well, from working together. So I would say it's a huge opportunity here to leverage the great work in a call like this today and in a webinar. So I would say use that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Michael and Nikki and Liz, for participating in this forward-looking segment of our panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for organizing all of this.
My pleasure. So we are now at the conclusion of our event. We did slip over slightly, 2 minutes over, but it was such a joy to spend this time with all of our speakers and participants, and each one of you. Thank you so much for being a part of this historic event, the first ever Clinical Research Nurse Day. And we hope to be a part of many more in the future. So thank you all for joining. Please, in the chat, please, click on the link for our survey. It would be a great honor for you to provide us feedback on how we did from your perspective. And we thank each and every one of you who have joined. Thank you so much for being a part of this wonderful day, the first ever Clinical Research Nurse Day. And with that, from all of us here at Nurse Now Staffing and all of us here that helped put this together for Clinical Research Nurse Day, we trust you'll have a blessed and happy and safe day in all that you do from this point forward. Thank you all. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.